Hola, soy Ariel Klein, soy docente y amante de la ópera. Fui durante años guía de uno de los teatros más increíbles del mundo y me dedico a difundir el mundo de la ópera a través de distintas actividades y de encuentros con artistas. Comenzamos con este canal independiente y con esta serie de entrevistas, entendiendo que para acercarse a la ópera no existen fronteras ni límites sociales o de edad. Bienvenidas y bienvenidos al Club de la Ópera. Nuestro entrevistado dijo que por lo menos una vez en la vida debemos ver el Gran Cañón. Y bueno, le hicimos caso. Nace en Tucson, Arizona, Estados Unidos. Por iniciativa de su madre, comenzaría a aprender piano, y su dedicación y talento lo llevaron a convertirse en un solista de nivel internacional. En el camino, un maestro formado en las tradiciones italianas de la ópera hizo cambiar su rumbo. Ganó el premio de dirección orquestal Herbert von Karajan en 1984 y fue director de orquesta principal en la Ópera Estatal Húngara entre 1985 y el año 2005. En su carrera trabajó con las orquestas más importantes del mundo y con algunas de las figuras de la ópera más destacadas e inolvidables. Hoy hablará con nosotros. Damas y caballeros, con ustedes el Maestro Rico Saccani.
Well, welcome everyone. Today we are here and we want you not to adjust your sound system. I'm speaking English. We usually do this in Spanish, but we have a very special guest here with us today. Maestro Rico Saccani is with us. We have one of the finest orchestra conductors who has worked with some of the finest orchestras in the world, and today we'll be honored with his experience. So welcome, Maestro. I hope you do enjoy this interview and that you feel comfortable with us, and we hope that the audience can learn a lot from you about orchestra conducting. Welcome.
Thank you very much, Ariel. Finally, we get a chance to meet.
Excellent. Well, Maestro, our first question has to do with your first approach to music. As far as I understand, and I read this actually on your book, we will tell people about your book later. You have your own autobiography called An American Conductor Made in Italy, An American Conductor, the history of American conductor. Is that correct?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Perfect. And that biography tells us a lot about you, your work, a lot of interesting stories. And the first question has to do with one of the chapters, which talks about your approach onto music. So how was that? Did you actually dream to become an orchestra conductor as a child? And also, we would like to know how important was music in your family?
Well, no, I absolutely did not dream about becoming an orchestra conductor. My mother, who was a ballerina for the San Francisco Ballet and also danced flamenco when she was growing up, because we grew up in Arizona on the frontera with Mexico.
Uh-huh.
And so when I became 6 years, on my 6th birthday, she decided it was time to start piano lessons to keep me disciplined, to instill discipline in me, and to open up the I was a wild child. So she wanted to calmar me and teach me discipline and open up the world of piano music to me, which she did. And the idea of conducting didn't come until I was 30. But the real light bulb in favor of music didn't really go off until I was 12, when I had the first chance of playing a complete Mozart piano concerto, the last one in B flat, the 27th, K595, with the local orchestra. And being surrounded by 50 other musicians, that there was something, I knew I wanted to be around musicians making music. I didn't know how it was going to eventually happen, but if I had to choose between being alone on stage and playing piano or being on stage playing surrounded by other musicians, I knew this is the area that I wanted to go into.
Great. So you felt that was your place, surrounded by musicians, honestly?
Oh, absolutely, no question about it. And then for some reason, I wish somebody who's an expert in astrology could tell me in 1980, for some reason, and by that time, between the ages of 21 and 30, I was playing piano professionally. I was managed by a big agency in New York, and I was playing symphony concerts, concertos, and 300 recitals across North America. And for some reason in 1980, a lot of pianists decided to become conductors. Myung Wang Chung, Barenboim, that was his big year for going into conducting. Philippe Entremont, Tamas Vashari, and many other pianists all of a sudden decided to go into conducting. So it must have been something in the stars that led the way for pianists to follow conducting.
It was the time for the pianists to become conductors. That's amazing, and a big coincidence, as you say. So, music indeed was important in your family, as your mother, she was a ballerina, as you said, and this is interesting. That first it was an instrument of discipline. So how did it work? I mean, you finally became.
It worked. You know what a fly swatter is? What do you call it? To kill the mosque. And she used to sit with me every day.
Yeah.
Every day, and if I started to get up to leave, to make sure that I stayed at the piano. No, she was tough. She was tough. But it paid off. It was worth it.
It worked.
It worked.
It worked. Great. So, Maestro,
today they would arrest you, but back then it worked.
It did work. Well, thank you very much for sharing that. So now our second question has to do with something professional and personal at the same time, as you have conducted a remarkable number of orchestras all over the world. So you had to deal with an extraordinary number of musicians with whom, of course, you had to work at a very deep human level. Was there any of those orchestras especially unforgettable for you? And we hope this is on a positive way, maybe unforgettable or maybe tough to work with.
There was one that was tough to work with. The other 300 were positive, absolutely positive. But then there were the super plus. And of course, the one that sticks out to me the most is the Metropolitan Orchestra. And it's still today, for opera, it's still the #1 opera orchestra in the world. And this was thanks to Levine, who hired the best musicians possible. He paid them more than any other orchestra in the United States at the time, but he demanded more from them than other conductors demanded from their musicians. And they all, I remember when I went there, for every rehearsal, all the musicians would come to the rehearsal with a huge smile on their face, because they had the best health package, they had the best vacation package, they had the best salary, they had the best work schedule, and in return he wanted the absolute best playing for every single performance, and they did 225 performances a year. So it was quite remarkable. Of course, the Bavarian Radio Orchestra in Munich, the Vienna Philharmonic, which is the Vienna State Opera Orchestra, many of the Chinese orchestras have gone like this in the last 10 years.
Oh,
Especially the NCPA, the National Center for the Performing Arts Orchestra in Beijing. First class, world class. The National Symphony of Ireland, the Royal Philharmonic of Denmark in Copenhagen, the Rome Opera Orchestra, the Houston Symphony, which was also the Houston Opera Orchestra.
mm-hmm.
The only one that was the most difficult, I must be honest, was Monte Carlo. They were a little bit on the
Really?
prima donna, so it was like pulling teeth. But once the prince came into the box, everything became smooth for the performance.
Oh, really? Well, it was good there was a prince, at the end there.
Absolutely.
Great. Well, thanks again for sharing that. And now, this question has to do with a bit of history, music history in the 20th century. As we know, the 20th century, with all the different media that flourished, made conducting a very eye-catching spectacle. And what we would like to know is, Maestro, were there any conductors that you enjoyed watching or that you looked up to, maybe when studying or when you just started playing the piano at the start? Was there any special conductor you looked up to from this really famous conductors?
Many. Of course, growing up in the States, Leonard Bernstein was on television with his young people's concerts. I grew up with those on Sunday afternoons at 3 o'clock live. And you can imagine the impact that it had on a young musician in the desert in Arizona. I mean, I still remember all of the broadcasts.
Wow.
Karajan was, of course, another one who revolutionized conducting, because his passion was to put his fingerprint and be absolutely controlling. First, before video in the recording studio, and he was responsible for he edited all of his recordings. He was there firsthand to make sure every edit was exactly how he wanted. He adjusted all of the balances. And so he created his sound. And so he was the first one to do that. Then when the video age came in, he took that to a whole different level, being in charge of all the camera angles, all the cuts, he knew exactly what image he wanted to create. So that was his main contribution from a technological standpoint.
It's great that you quote that, Maestro, because many people forget that Karajan was not only just a performer, a conductor. He was a sound engineer.
My goodness!
On the papers, he was a film director. He turned classical music and opera into a cinematic experience. He worked on the cinematography. He worked on many aspects. So it's great that you know this, because many people forget about it.
Of course, then the broadcast that they had with Karl Böhm, for example, which to me he's the great grandfather of the German tradition, and I used to love watching him because he was so credible, and he had such an economy of gestures. He was not wild. He knew in very, very little amount of space, he was able to transmit to the musicians exactly what he wanted.
Great.
Another one, of course, was Carlos Kleiber, was just still to this day, a god. Just unbelievable. And then from the Italians, of course, you had Abbado and Muti, which were unbelievably prepared. And so the preparation, the preparation that I saw with Abbado and Muti, and the years and the hours that they invested on never coming to a rehearsal unless they knew not 100%, but 1,000% everything that was in the score and exactly how they wanted to transmit their unique individual interpretations. This is very much lost today. Very, very much lost today.
Well, that's a shame, but it's really important to put this back on the scene sometime. This work.
If I can put in a parenthesis.
Yeah.
Another main one was George Zell with the Cleveland Orchestra. And what I was told, and what I discovered later when I went to Cleveland, was that he would take the score and taking the theater, Severance Hall, which has a large capacity, into consideration, and taking his interpretation that he wanted to transmit, he would use the score as a starting point. And then if there were inner voices that he wanted to bring out, if it was only written for one horn, he would add 3 more horns. And so you would have 4 horns playing a line that he wanted to make sure that they could hear all the way back to the last seats in the theater. And then he would adjust the dynamics. So he wouldn't want the trombones playing fortissimo when the violins needed to be heard more than the trombone. Yeah. So he would constantly, every bar he would go through. And if he needed to change bowings, he would change bowings. But before he went for the first rehearsal, he would absolutely know what the music had in front of every single musician. He got his hands, if you want to say dirty, by getting involved with the first flute, the second flute, the piccolo, the first oboe, the second oboe, the English, every single instrument's music. He went over part by part. And so I was brought to this, thank goodness, at an early stage, because after the Karajan competition, one of the very first concerts I had was with the Genova Teatro Carlo Felice Orchestra in Italy. And we were going to do the Tchaikovsky Fifth Symphony. Okay. And usually any professional orchestra in the world, the Tchaikovsky Fifth Symphony, by the time you're a professional musician, you've played it at least 6 or 7 times. So I started the first 3 minutes of the first movement in the first rehearsal, and every string player was going in a different direction, and every wind player was playing a different dynamic and a different phrase, and then the double bass players were scratching their heads, and nobody knew what was going on. And I said, "Excuse me, how many of you have played this before?"
None.
Not one. And then I found out that not only did they not own the music in their library, but they rented it. I won't say from what company, but it's the Italian editing company. Yeah, the big one. And they're notorious when they have to send parts of a symphony or even of an opera. They have a man that doesn't know what he's doing in the library, and he takes whatever he wants to, maybe from the last performance in Hamburg, and a few parts from London, and a few parts from Buenos Aires, and a few parts from Mexico City, and so there's no uniformity whatsoever.
Wow!
So I wasted about 3 of the 4 days of rehearsal with them taking their pencils, change. Oh. After that, every concert I do, including operas, I get all the parts, and it takes weeks, but I go over every single part. I do every dynamic. I do every bowing. I do every wind and brass articulation. I tell the timpani what sticks I want to, everything. How changing the dynamics. So I know exactly what everybody's part is when I get there for the first rehearsal. I scan it. I put it away on a hard disk and now in the cloud. And so when somebody invites me to do something, an opera or a symphony, I send them everything. They print it out in the library in whatever city they're at. And the players are happy because they almost never have to touch their pencils during a rehearsal.
So when you go to that orchestra, it almost felt like Italian or Argentinian traffic. I mean, it was chaotic. Everyone was going from here to there, or it was really unpredictable what could happen. So it was a lot of hard work. And many times people ignore what conducting is about, because it's not just about standing there, showing up for the rehearsals, but it's a lot of work of research.
Well, I will say, nobody today does this. Nobody wants to spend 10 days to 2 weeks, 8 hours a day doing this. It's basically library work, but it pays off such enormous dividends, because from the very first second with a new orchestra, or even an orchestra that you're going back to, they know that you respect their time, that you've done your homework, that you are super prepared, that you do everything by memory, and they know that when they come to work with you, they're not wasting their time, and they know for sure I'm going to let them go early from instead of keeping them for 3 hours, I'll let them go 15, 20, sometimes more minutes early, because we didn't have to waste time doing this and erasing and rewriting.
Yeah, that's correct. And this question and your answer takes us to a different question, because as you're saying, there's sometimes many conductors who don't work this deep. Today, it's really, as you say, hard to find this level of deep work. And also, and this is quoted in your book, you worked as a guest conductor for many years, and you explain that in many opera houses, the cast, the conductor, and even the orchestra members have to rotate frequently. So this can lead sometimes, as you said, to very uninspiring performances. Then comes the question, how hard is it for a guest conductor to become accustomed to work with rotating musicians and singers, and to know in advance that a complete connection between cast, orchestra, and of course conductor might not be possible?
Well, the first thing a conductor of opera has to be willing to do is leave their ego at home. And a lot of conductors have a hard time because they're not the main center of attraction in opera. And there are many conductors who refuse to conduct opera. They just absolutely refuse. And also because of all of these compromises, they just don't like it. They just absolutely don't like it. And I remember when I was at the Met, I was sitting once for a performance that Levine was conducting, and next to me was Charles Dutoit, who had been invited to come and do 3 French operas at the Met. And I looked at him and I said, Maestro Dutoit, opera is nothing but one compromise after another. That's the nature of the beast. I mean, there's nothing anybody can do about it. Either you accept it or you don't accept it. Yeah. And speaking of constantly changing singers, it brings to mind a performance of La Gioconda I had to conduct in Budapest, always with no rehearsal, because the German countries, including Hungary and Germany, Austria, there are never any rehearsals with the orchestra, never. And you always have one piano rehearsal and a little bit of a stage rehearsal for a total of 3 hours the night before the performance, and that's all you get.
That's all.
So you just show up in Vienna or anywhere in Germany. Tonight is Notte di Figaro. Hello, okay, here we go. Boom. And you hope there are no train wrecks and then tomorrow is going to be Wagner, and the next night is going to be Madame Butterfly. And the orchestra knows all of these. So you just have to know where they need you and where they don't need you.
Oh.
So anyway, I was saying that in a performance of La Gioconda in Budapest, the bass, who was scheduled to perform that evening, was sick. And they couldn't find anybody else. So the solution was to bring in a bass who said, I'll sing it in the pit next to the maestro with the music, but you have to get the original bass in costume on stage doing lip sync. So
that sounded like a great plan, eh?
Yeah, and that's what we did. And the audience. And it worked. It worked.
Nobody could tell the difference. Oh my God! So that's amazing. There's so many.
And that's why.
Yeah.
Maestro Levine, Maestro Abado, Maestro Muti, Maestro Kleiber, the gods, they don't accept this. They have their full rehearsal schedule, and they have one cast. If they have to do 10 performances, the contract hires the singers for 10 performances. And the same with the orchestra musicians, because for the guest conductors, they rotate. One night you have this concertmaster, the next night you have another concertmaster, the next night you have a different first flute, the next night you have, all the orchestra is constantly changing. Not with these. They hire the orchestra for 10 performances of the Traviata. They're going to have the same orchestra and the same singers with rehearsals for 10 performances. And so they ensure themselves of an absolutely top-notch consistency of quality. And that's the intelligent way of doing it.
Yeah. We get it, and it's if it's not written on the contract, otherwise, you can't work as a guest conductor expecting the same standard, to keep a standard, as you say. because musicians will rotate, even singers. Yeah, and people may go to one performance and say it's a disaster. Maybe go to another and say, wow, that was glorious. So yeah, we understand what you're talking about. That's great. Thank you, Maestro. And well, you mentioned Budapest, and that's certainly a city that played a major role in your conducting career. How would you describe Budapest in terms of its musical scene for a foreign music lover? And how would you describe the local Hungarian audience on their taste in opera and classical music?
So I first went to Budapest in 1984. And don't forget, that was 5 years before the fall of the Berlin Wall. And at that time, there's still two, today there's still two opera houses. There's the main opera house, the Hungarian opera house, which if you see the movie Meeting Venus with Glenn Close, that's, I mean, it looks like it's a Hollywood set, but that's the real opera house. I've never seen an opera house so beautiful in my life as this. And in fact, the orchestra playing in that movie Meeting Venus is the Budapest Philharmonic, or the players today that are still playing in the Hungarian opera house. So they were doing every day except Sunday, I believe. They had a performance every night, and Wednesdays they had a matinee and an evening performance, and Saturday they had a matinee and an evening performance. So they were doing between the two theaters, they were doing over close to 500 performances of opera and ballet during a season. And what amazed me most was the children. You could find any 10-year-old or 12-year-old and ask them what Italian aria they like better, or which 5 arias they like, or operas or arias they like better, and they would tell you without batting an eye. They knew exactly the repertoire inside and out, and they could tell you why they liked it. And the same thing for Wagner. They could tell you which Wagner opera they liked best, and which act in a Wagner, and why they liked it, and tell you, and tell you even about the stage direction and the costumes and the sets and how it related to the. And I'm thinking, my God, these kids know more than I do. I've never seen anything like this.
Wow.
Today, that's ancient history. After 1989 and MTV, that's finished. Those days are gone. Unfortunately. But there's still, it's so ingrained in their cultural DNA that the opera house, especially, and Erkel it's like their second homes.
Wow.
The stores close usually around 6:30, and the concerts start precisely at 7 o'clock. So they go straight from their work to the performance. And this is still today part of it. You were asking me about what are their tastes.
Yeah.
And their tastes have always been relatively conservative, relatively very conservative. I remember when I was chief conductor of the Philharmonic, there were many standard pieces, even by Rachmaninoff, or the Cacciatorian Violin Concerto, that they had never played before. And even the Planets by Gustav Holst, they had never played before. Or the Enigma Variations by Elgar, never played before. And so I included these as much as possible, which to me were our standard, and we're standard, even 20 years ago were standard. So I tried to broaden the repertoire as much as possible with standard international compositions.
Sorry, excuse me, Maestro. You're even saying that the Planets, the symphonies by Holst, they were like a new thing to this audience.
It had never been performed before. No.
Wow, that is amazing. Now that I think about it, it's surprising, because that's really interesting. Sorry, Maestro.
But remember that. Remember that Johannes Brahms was a founding member and on the original board of directors of the Budapest Philharmonic, and also Gustav Mahler had a lot of his compositions debuted there. I remember when I did the Mahler Third Symphony, they were still using the original parts because it had been originally debuted there by Mahler, and so they were still using Mahler's original parts to the Third Symphony. The same thing with Brahms when I did the Second Piano Concerto there. They were that had been debuted also with the Budapest Philharmonic, and they were still using Brahms's original parts of the concerto from when he debuted it there. So the history, just you can just peel the history off the walls of the opera house. So it's
Oh, that's
unbelievable.
marvelous. Yeah, and inspiring, of course, because I mean that's a great office to work.
When I would walk in the stage door and you go up a flight of stairs, the first you see Mahler, and then you would see Otto Klemperer, because he was a big figure there. He conducted there for many years, and even to this day they talk about when you play Beethoven, you have to use Klemperer tempos, so that they have ingrained in their DNA his tempos. So
wow.
They are going to, no matter what I do, they will play Otto Klemperer's tempos that they've been playing for 50 years or 60 years.
That is really amazing, and it actually pictures a very particular audience with your own, as you say, musical DNA and your own customs and traditions. Really interesting. So thanks for sharing this, and it's really interesting to know all these stories and these facts that actually can define this particular audience and its musical DNA. So thank you again, Maestro, for that answer. Now, we have a question that has to do with your work in New York. Your opera debut at the New York Metropolitan Opera House took place in 1989, and that was when you conducted 4 performances of Il Trovatore. How do you remember that experience? How challenging is it to conduct at America's top opera house, considering that, as you wrote yourself, the Met spends all the time and resources necessary to achieve constant artistic excellence?
True. They're unique in this. They're absolutely unique. So how difficult was it? It wasn't difficult at all. Well, we had plenty of rehearsals with the singers. I think they even gave us one complete run-through on stage with the orchestra, which was a luxury that you can't imagine. And so it was really not difficult at all. The only unexpected inconvenience was during the first performance, the tenor decided he was going to be sick before the third act aria, and so he canceled. And so they had to bring in and thank goodness the Met is one of the only opera houses that has a second cast always ready. So they had to throw in the second cast tenor, put on the costume, and get ready to come on stage for Act 3 in the aria. But other than that, it was fine. It was wonderful. And then after that, they invited me for many performances of Zeffirelli's Aida, and then Zeffirelli's Traviata, which were unspeakably beautiful. Unspeakably.
Yeah.
Oh, unbelievable.
Well, this is a question that I'm thinking of right now. Many times, we imagine that the conductor, usually you're not facing the audience because you're facing the orchestra, of course. And actually in some opera houses, there's like the pit, like in Bayreuth. It's almost below the stalls. Yeah. So it's hidden. Mm-hmm. So is it actually, and I'm talking about the Met itself because it is huge. I have visited this opera house. I have seen performances there. And of course, I've been both at the orchestra and at, in the family circle up there, what we call the hen house in Buenos Aires, up there, Logione.
The stratosphere.
Exactly, yeah. I was part of the space program, and I made it through. So
it's 4,500 seats.
Yeah. So when we think of that, so how overwhelming is it for a conductor to at least to see for the first time, to look at this auditorium and to realize, of course, you're about to conduct there, for all these people.
Well, it's magical for about the first 15 seconds. Then you have to get to work and focus on the orchestra and the singers. So you get to work.
Well, that's great. So the magic is strong, but it goes fast, flies.
Yeah.
Great. Thank you, Maestro. Now, Maestro, the Islas Malvinas, Falkland Islands War, played an unexpected part in your life, as Maestro Giuseppe Patané finally would attend the Teatro Colón of Buenos Aires, our opera house, to conduct, and instead you met him in Lake Maggiore in 1982, as he finally wouldn't come here. You explained that it was actually him who talked you into pursuing your career as a conductor instead of a piano soloist. Then you became his apprentice during 7 years, following him from opera house to from one opera house to the other. So, what would you say was the most important lessons that you were able to learn from Maestro Patané?
I would say the preparation, the unbelievable preparation of the score. He always told me, Rico, I won't meet with you until you can play at the piano. You have to be able to play everything, play for the rehearsals, and you have to know the orchestration backwards and forwards, and you also have to know the text by memory. So when you have all of those things done, then come and see me, and we'll get to work together. So the first opera that I started with him was Otello. And I remember spending 3 months on Otello during the summer when I was at Tanglewood. And I was supposed to be spending more time with my symphonic conducting studies, but I was spending all my time at the piano learning Otello for him.
Uh-huh.
And so this was an immense eye-opener for me. And I just assumed that all conductors had this level of expectation and preparation. And it was very soon when I started seeing other conductors that I realized that he was absolutely in a universe of his own. But
wow.
Again, the orchestra players, the singers especially, adored him because they knew that he was always there in case any emergency happened. He was always there to get them out of any danger or any problem from 1 second to the next.
Wow!
And so this was probably the most important lesson that I learned from him.
Well, so it's really important to quote that you didn't just get, you didn't just learn on a musical level, but also on a human level from Maestro Patané.
Well, on a musical level, of course, he taught me all of the unwritten Italian traditions that are not printed in the scores. And so he was a firm believer of respecting these Italian traditions, never forgetting that his father, Franco Patané, he always said himself, my father was 10 times better than I was. And so he grew up in Naples with his father. He grew up in the San Carlo Opera House, learning from his father from 5 years old, 6 years old. He had all of the operas, the Italian operas, in his DNA from a very early age.
Wow.
And all the traditions. And he passed those on to me, which I was unbelievably blessed. I remember, so I prepared this Otello, and he said, meet me in Hamburg, because I'm doing some performances there with Giulia Varadi, soprano, Fischer Dieskau's wife, and Piero Capuccilli, baritone. Baritone, and Vladimir Atlantov was the tenor. And so this was my first experience. I had prepared it for 3 months at the piano, and everything was at the piano, at the piano, at the piano. Then I went to Hamburg, and the first meeting of us was during one of the first rehearsals with everybody in costume, lighting, sets, and orchestra and everything. So I was alone in the hall of the Hamburg Opera House. And I'll never forget hearing the music. And this was the fourth act soprano, the Willow song, the Willow aria from the fourth act, beginning of the fourth act. Mm-hmm. And hearing the orchestra play what I had spent 3 months playing on the piano, and the costumes, and the lighting, and the stage sets, and everything else. I just sat there, and it all came together, and I just was weeping. I couldn't stop weeping for about 10 minutes.
Wow!
I had never experienced anything like that symphonically ever. I mean, it's a completely different world.
Marvelous.
When it works, it works. There's nothing like it. Usually, it doesn't work like that. 98% of the time, it doesn't work like that. And even when I worked with Pavarotti, I said, how many of when I was with him for his 25th anniversary, I said, how many performances do you think really, when everything came together perfectly? And he stopped and he said, 325 years.
That's a good number. So it's not always tears of joy. There's a lot of tears.
Well, you have so many variables that can go wrong. There's just so many things that can go wrong.
Yeah. Well, that's the beauty of it, and that's me as a film school graduate. I always tell people that that's the big difference with movies, with films. You cannot edit. I mean, you cannot fix anything. It's like, jumping from a plane. I mean, hope the parachute will open and you can land alive. So that's what I understand as the beauty of opera and, of course, orchestral music, live music. So this is really clear. It's really clarifying. So, Maestro, thank you again. And, this question has to do with your work, of course, not only conducting world-famous orchestras, but also some renowned singers, as Leo Nucci and, of course, Luciano Pavarotti. So how were them to work with? How was, what could you tell us about your experience on working with Nucci and Pavarotti? Pavarotti was 1989, is that correct?
Yes.
And was the Philadelphia Orchestra opera, right? Right.
I think it might have even been a few years before that, but somewhere in the late 80s. Like that.
Yeah.
On the way over here, I made a short list of some of the singers that I had a chance to work with, and I've got Alfredo Kraus,
wow,
Pilar Loringar, Roberto Alagna, Thomas Allen, Juan Pons, Jaime Arregal, Francisco Araiza, Cecilia Bartoli, Fedora Barbieri, Carlo Bergonzi, Rockwell Blake, Leo Nucci, Cheryl Milnes, Piero Cappuccilli, Giovanna Casola, Gena Dimitrova, Fiorenzo Cosotto, Aprile Milo, Ilana Contrubas, Peter Dvorsky, Gwyneth Jones, Paolo Gavanelli, Ronaldo Gioiotti, Gabriel Bacquier, Alain Fondari, Jean-Philippe Lafont, Edith Gruberova, Maria Guleghina, Vladimir Atlantov, Pata Burcelazza, Thomas Hampson, Luis Lima, Ruggero Raimondi, Katia Ricciarelli, Giorgio Zancanaro, and many. So I've been very, very blessed. Very blessed.
Well, so have them. I mean,
working with all of them. Each one taught me something. I remember with Kraus, it was in Vienna for Lucia di Lammermoor. It was the first Lucia di Lammermoor. It was with him and Gruberova, and it was my first time doing Lucia, and we came to the aria in the fourth act with a piano rehearsal. Went straight through it, and he came up to me and he goes, "Maestro, we understand each other." And from then, after that, he took me under his arms, and he was the sweetest gentleman to me. He took care of me. He invited me out after performances to dinner with his wife. Absolute gran signores. Just
wow,
unbelievable class. And as an artist, second to none.
Great. That's great, and it might be, and just reading this list that you made on your way here gives us an idea of the human level of work that you had to do with many people who were already renowned. They had their own ideas, they had their own way of working, and as you said, to understand each other at this level, well,
it's the conductor's job to adapt himself to their interpretations. They've been interpreting and performing hundreds of times each opera. So who am I to go in there and try to change something because maybe I might like a phrase a different way? No.
Wow.
I have to learn their interpretation and adapt my technique to what they want to make their life easier.
So thank you again, Maestro. Well, many of the people who are watching you today, Maestro, are music students and are also orchestra conducting students. As an awarded and respected conductor, you are a figure to look up to. And what would you advise them in order to build a career as solid conductors?
The first thing is I'm sorry, but the first thing is you have to be an international level soloist, either on piano or a string instrument, because you remember that the list of great conductors that I grew up with, 90% of them were pianists. Mazel was a world-class violinist. You know, Mehta was played double bass, and a world-class string player. So I mean, you have to be really excellent, superb on an instrument. I still believe that piano is the best of all the instruments, because if you grew up playing Beethoven sonatas or concertos or Mozart sonatas, it's much easier to take your analysis of a piano sonata or a piano concerto and do a symphony. It's because you're already used to the culture, to the sound. So it's much easier to apply the same thing to a symphony. Mm-hmm. And I remember when I was conducting in Spain, I did a tour with the great Spanish pianist Joaquin Achucarro, and he was doing the Brahms Second Piano Concerto. And he came. We only had one run through, and we played all four movements from beginning to end. And when we finished, he jumped up and he said, "You've played this before, haven't you?" And I said, "Yeah, I have. I have."
You got me.
And so we.
That's great.
It makes a difference. It makes a difference.
So that will be a huge step, a very important step to master an instrument on a soloist level. Okay.
That, and don't forget, a lot of these great conductors. Karajan himself, he was 10 years in Aachen. Don't forget, small town of Aachen in Germany before he went to Berlin. Karl Böhm and Schulte. They grew up playing piano in the rehearsal room, teaching singers the parts to the operas. There's no shortcut, and I think a lot of the young conductors today want a shortcut. They don't want to put in the years of work necessary. They want to be a conductor at 18 years old. It doesn't work that way. You have nothing to offer. You have nothing to offer anybody. I mean, very few in their 20s. What are you going to teach an orchestra in your 20s? Nothing. So. Put off learning conducting until you're in your 30s. Spend 10 years in the opera house playing for singers. Play everything. Learn the repertoire that way. Then the break will come. You'll get your chance. The conductor will get sick one night, and you'll be thrown and make your debut conducting, like they all did. Well, Levine was an assistant to George Zell in Cleveland. Mm-hmm. So. Everybody was an assistant to somebody. Everybody.
You know, Maestro, this is really important because it's, as you are saying, it's not just about studying, but it's also about this path, which is a long way and which involves experience, involves becoming an apprentice, learning the traditions, looking at the work of other conductors. And I also think it's really valuable for students to learn, but also to enjoy, because it's a long way of learning. I mean, and you have to enjoy this path you're taking. So it's a long road. Now, Maestro, we Argentines feel pride for our Teatro Colón's stunning architecture and its impressive acoustics. You have conducted in some of the most notorious concert halls and opera houses in the world. So we would like to ask you, did any of those stand out for its acoustics, in your opinion? And of course, if any of those was architecturally, overwhelming?
Well, acoustics today, there are so many I mean, there's limitless concert halls and opera houses with fabulous acoustics. The technology today is international, worldwide. You can find phenomenal from Beijing to the Met, to Los Angeles, to London, to in Italy. I mean, every country, Budapest, of course. A lot of the older opera houses that still keep the original wooden floors, which wood they've finally discovered that wood is still the best acoustical reflector of sound.
Wow!
And so there's so many of them. A lot of the Italian opera houses, San Carlo, of course, in Naples, is a jewel, is an absolute jewel. Not to mention La Scala in Vienna, and there's so many. I mean, it's really limitless. The Rome Opera House, many.
And was there any of these halls that you felt for the first time that you were impressed by the acoustics? Because of course you learn playing on different halls, different auditoriums. What was the first which really made you feel that the acoustics were amazing to perform or to conduct in?
Well, the first was obviously Budapest. I was called there at the last minute, and this was right after the Karajan competition, and they just threw me on stage. I knew the program. I had prepared it well in advance for Patiné, and as Patiné frequently did, he canceled at the last minute, and so he sent me instead. And I'll never forget walking on stage for the concert, and I had never seen the inside of the opera house. And I took 2 steps and I looked at it, and I thought I was in a Hollywood set. I really did. And so that was that. It's much easier to conduct in a great opera house than an ugly poor acoustic one. Much easier.
Well, great, Maestro. You're saying that also not only the acoustics in Budapest are impressive, but also the architecture had a strong impact on yourself.
Yes. Also, the Paris, the Opera Garnier.
Oh,
the original. I mean,
with the Chagall's work.
Chagall, it's just unbelievable, and the upholstered chairs and everything, just a jewel, absolute jewel.
Well, thank you very much, and I must say you must come and visit the Teatro Colón of Buenos Aires. We will, in the future, when all this settles down, when this science fiction film comes to an end, it will be great to show you the opera house, of course, in Buenos Aires, and it will be great to interview you again, to do a short interview, so you can tell us what you think of the architecture, and well, that would complete your list of opera houses in the world. Certainly.
An enormous privilege.
Hopefully that would happen soon in the future. Thank you very much for your time. You have answered a lot of questions. You have shared with us a lot of experience and, of course, great stories. Well, we hope to meet again in the future, maybe to do another interview in the future, hopefully talking about your work and in an active artistic world again. So thank you again, and we hope you have enjoyed and felt comfortable during this interview.
Ariel, I'll say it again. Congratulations to you for your website, his club, and for your impeccable preparation, which stands as it's very unique in this industry. So thank you. I look forward to meeting you in person, hopefully in Buenos Aires.
Hopefully, yeah. Well, let's hope for the best, Maestro.
Ojalá.
Yeah. So finally, thank you. Grazie, tante grazie, Maestro. And of course, köszönöm. Thank you in Hungarian as well. Although I have a Hungarian passport, I know you're more Hungarian than I am. You spent a long time there. So thank you again. It's been a pleasure.
Okay. Thanks a lot. Buenas tardes.
Buenas tardes.
Esperamos que hayas disfrutado de la entrevista. Suscríbete al Club de la Ópera para videos cada semana.